So what we've learned already, even though, as I said, each class is self-contained, so you didn't lose everything by not having been there, is there's such a thing as scientific observation. So what's called the scientific method is seeing something, drawing a conclusion about it that's observable, repeatable, and definable. Anything that's observable, repeatable, and definable is viewed as factual in science. Nobody ever saw anything make itself. And even if you were to suppose something could make itself, you would have to say, well, when? Before it was there or after it was there? So because everybody knows this, it's a normative conclusion that there has to be a cause that brought everything else about. Okay, so this cause can't just be still another thing, because then you're left with the same old question, which is what? How'd this come about? So no matter what you reduce physical reality to, whatever you reduce time-space to, you have to say, and what brought that about? So the Jewish word for God, Hashem, literally means the name. And the name that's referred to is the name that's spelled in Hebrew letters, Yud, and then Hey, Vav, and then Hey, which is all of the time tenses put together. Is, was, will be. Meaning what brought everything about is what we'll call the source of being. So in English, when people use the word God, it gets tricky, because what they picture in their mind's eye is some figure, very defined, a long white beard, male, okay, got it? We're saying it's a spiritual source of all things being. Does this make sense to you? Okay, so the next thing to know is that all things in the world are physically interrelated, which you probably learned about in school. So when you look at the ecology, what would happen to the world if you took out all the earthworms? What do they do? If you were an earthworm, how would you spend your day? Crawling around, eating things that are in the dirt and making holes in the earth, little tunnels. Without that, nothing could grow. So everything is very intertwined. This is true of your own body. There's a science called anthropics, in which the human body is studied. So the eyelid had to come about at the same time. Okay, your nose requires little hairs, otherwise it couldn't filter anything. Okay, got this? So we see that there's not only a source of all things, but that all things have enormously complex order. Do we see this? Mm-hmm. Do you know what a lobotomy is, by the way? Any of you know what that is? They used to think, you know what it is, yeah? Did you ever meet anybody who was lobotomized?
No.
Okay. Back in, I think it was the 30s or 40s, I'm not sure, because medical science sometimes is rather arrogant, they theorized that since cognitive thought and emotion are from over here in the brain, that if you have a violent criminal, you fool around with this a little bit, you take out a lobe in which strong emotion takes place, they won't be violent and criminal anymore. What do you think happened?
They're probably disabled.
Not physically disabled, but they had no emotions. They went through lives like, okay, clear? So everything is necessary. There's nothing in the world that isn't necessary. The appendix is necessary. They discovered that it was part of the immune system. You could live without it, but you're better off with it. Okay, clear? Okay, so you see that there's also complexity, and there's no such thing as order that doesn't have a mind behind it. Order isn't random. Order is the opposite of random. And on an instinctive level, we know this. If I were to tell you that this alphabet sheet wrote itself, I was spilling ink randomly for a really long time, and this is how it came out. Would anybody believe me?
No.
No. So the reason order doesn't come out of chaos. So the force that brought everything about is also a force that's very knowing and very involved. So the reason why it's worth knowing that there's a creator out there who's knowing and involved is because we're part of the creation. So when you ask yourself, and what am I for? So we'll take this back to when you ask them, what's plastic for? What's an earthworm for? You know what something is for by looking at what it could do. So what humans can do is make moral choices, think abstractly, communicate abstractly and deeply. So now, and this is all we learned in a previous class, so I apologize to the two people who were in this class. Now you have to say, and how do I develop myself as a human being? What do I do to develop myself? So there's an era that we'll call in history the era of roots. So by that I mean is when you look at a garden and you see all different kinds of plants. So you know it's not just the flower head that makes it different, it goes all the way down to the root, right? So if you were to scotch tape a rose to a daisy, it wouldn't become a rose. The roots are different. Its whole biology is different. So when human history was relatively young, people were developing societies and ways of thought. So everything then was much more fluid than it is now. So here are some different approaches to what does it mean to be a good person that we had then. Then when I hear from you, I want to hear what you think about what it means to be a good person now. So pick a civilization, any civilization. What? Renaissance. Okay, we would have wanted to go back, but let's look at Renaissance. So what would they consider a good person? Think Leonardo. Yeah.
Artsy. No.
Creative.
Yeah. Responsible.
Responsible, respected, multifaceted.
Someone with money.
Okay, and would have the fruits of success. Okay, could you see that's what Renaissance man would be? Okay. Now let's go back to what we said a good human is. We said moral, creative, making choices, benefiting others. A Renaissance man could be a good human, but he could be very successful as a Renaissance man and not be such a good human. Could you see where that's so? Mm-hmm. Let's look at another civilization. Give me another civilization. No, go back even further than Renaissance. Ancient Greece. So if you were a good person in ancient Greece, there are three main philosophies that became Roman philosophies but started in Greece. One is hedonism. You have a good time. That's what life's about. Eat, drink, be merry. Tomorrow you're going to die. Okay? That's one way of approach. Another approach is you have to achieve. Okay? So it doesn't matter what you achieve. As long as you work hard and you reach the goal, that's valid. Okay? And the third one was you have to know, because knowledge is power. Could you see where these three ways of thought are very much part of contemporary civilization? So this is why in Jewish literature they'll call our current civilization Roman. It's always referred to as the Roman exile because we live with the basic philosophies that were developed by the Romans via the Greeks. So you could be a great human being in America today, let's say. People say, wow, look at him. If he has a great time, and if he accomplished something, or if he knows a lot. You could see this? But let's go back to what being a good human being is. Is it accurate to say that all people who have a good time are very moral? No. Is it accurate to say that all people who achieve something have done achievements that are worthwhile? No. Is it accurate to say that all people who know a lot are really good people? No. So the Judaic version of what being a good person is being a good person. So you could also have a good time. You could also achieve something. You could also know a lot. But that's not your core. Your core is taking charge of your life, making moral choices, being creative, articulate, yourself. Okay, this is clear? So why bother being a good person? You won't get anywhere externally, and also in terms of living with yourself. You won't be happy with what you get unless you develop yourself as a person. So you see in nature, everything does do what it can do. Like, there are no birds that could fly, but I'm not into aviation, it's not my deal. Or just not. Or plants, I've had enough with chlorophyll, photosynthesis, I don't want to bother. So to be a really developed, actualized person, You have to look at yourself and say, who am I? And develop it in a way that's good. That makes sense to you so far? So now what I'm going to teach you is how to figure out who you are. Okay, there are 5 things that make you different than the person next to you. The first thing is heredity. Not too long ago, in psychology, they thought that you could put any child in environment A, and it'll turn out like any other child in environment A. Put him in environment B, he'll be like anyone in environment B. Turned out that's not true. Okay, do you know how they found this out? Because this is popular for ages. So they began to look at the issue of heredity in a very serious way shortly after the Vietnamese War in the 70s. Many people adopted children from Southeast Asia. Think about adopting parents, adoptive parents. What kind of people adopt children legally?
What kind?
Yeah, give me a picture of an adopting parent. What do you think? Your typical. First of all, they're married. Okay, tell me more.
Either middle class or high class.
Middle or high class, right?
Yeah.
Educated.
Financially stable.
Financially stable. You see this? Okay. So.
No criminal record.
And no criminal record. Okay. So a percentage of these families, even though most of them initially did not have children, some of them eventually had their own children, and some of them had children to begin with. So this provided the perfect study of children growing up in the same environment. Do they turn out basically the same? So for some reason that nobody could really quantify yet, the South Asian children consistently do better in math than the children born to the adoptive families. Okay, and this is across the board. Asians do better at math, and it's not environment. This is true of Southeast Asia, this is true of China, this is true of India. It's not, yeah, yeah, yeah. There's an undiscussed and informal quota in Harvard where they don't want Asians to take over the math department. So it's much harder for an Asian to get in than if you're of some other group. Okay, clear? Okay, there are a lot of informal quotas, by the way, in academia that nobody talks about. Did you know this? We have a family friend, he's from, and his name is Velvel Snow. Okay, but when he was filling in his applications for NYU, it got reversed in the computer, so his name, Velvel means wolf in Yiddish. So his name, instead of being Velvel Snow, became Snow Wolf. So they thought he was an American Indian, a Native American. So he got an almost immediate acceptance, okay? So he had to come for an interview nonetheless. Now, if there's ever anybody who looks Jewish, you know what I mean? I wanted to see the suit, the white shirt, the glasses, not too tall. Okay, got the picture? And then you're Snow Wolf? And like they tried to dump him, but they couldn't legally, but it was just, they tried really hard to get rid of him. So, yeah. I mean, they didn't want another Jew in the math department, like they did not, okay. So, oh, you want to be an accountant?
How surprising.
How shocking, yeah. Okay, in any case. So heredity is important. They also discovered that a child who's adopted at birth, if they have 2 alcoholic parents, is far more likely to end up an alcoholic. Okay, so who you are is partially your heredity, but only partially. Okay, so this will include what you look like, which certainly affects who you are. This will affect your energy level. It'll affect to some degree your intellect because the amount of brain cells you're born with are the amount of brain cells you'll have. They don't reproduce. Okay, that's all heredity. And then there's environment. Now, environment is tricky because everybody's environment is different. Even 2 children in the same family have a somewhat different environment. Okay, in your family, where do you fit in? Are you like the oldest, the youngest? Where are you? Oldest. Could you see, how many are after you? Could you see where they got experienced parents who knew what they were doing and you didn't? Yeah, okay. So even though you're in the same family, you had a different parental environment. Could you all see where that's so? Where were you in your family? Youngest. So you got parents who knew what they were doing, who'd been through the mill, who are a little older than they were when your older siblings were born and may not have the same energy level. Okay, clear? You could see this? So everybody's environment is different. And that's
nature versus nurture.
right. So I'm saying nature has a place, but nurture also has a place. But everyone's nurture is different. You went to school. You have different friends. You were exposed to different teachers. All of this affects how you see reality and how you see yourself. So everyone's environment also molds them. Next, the third thing that makes you you is potentials. So when you say somebody is a natural musician, you don't mean that there they are on the labor table just after being born singing Aida, which would be very strange indeed. But it means if and when they're exposed to music, they'll learn it better than somebody else will. Okay, so there are potentials. We don't all have the same potentials. Next, there are choices that you made, and even though you're young, you've already made some dramatic choices. Is that true?
Yes.
The big choices you make are the ones that affect your future lives. Could any of you give me an example of a big choice you made?
Coming to Israel for
Yes, you'll never be the same. Okay, whatever. Okay. Any other big choices that you've made?
not appropriate for classes.
Okay.
Right, waking up this morning, that was a good choice. I did good there.
What college to go to after?
What college to go to? Okay, later you'll make other choices, who to marry or not to marry, how to relate to people in your life or how not to relate to them. These are choices that affect you. So you also are the person who you choose to be on an ongoing basis, but I want to tell you something about choices. The big choices are pre-made by the small choices. So I'm going to give you a negative example and a positive one. So picture yourself at the end of World War II. Okay, you're an important Nazi, you're on the platform in Auschwitz. At the end of the war, the trains were coming in frequently because the Germans were putting all of their resources into killing as many Jews as possible because they saw the end was coming. So here you are at the platform, a train comes in, the people are half dead when they get off this horrific train, right? You point some to the right and some to the left. The people who go to the left are going to be killed immediately. The people who are sent to the right will not be killed immediately. If you've been doing this for 5 years, how likely is it that you're going to get a grip on yourself and say, who am I to decide who lives, who dies? What, am I crazy? Is that going to happen?
No.
It's not going to happen. Let's go back to the first day he was on the platform. He never did this before. And there was a lot of drama. People screaming, saying, no, we want to be together. You know, like there was a lot of that. People trying to hide babies, and all the babies were killed. Okay? They had them in their clothes and their bags. Okay, lots of screaming, lots of crying, lots of drama. Is it more likely that he would say at that point, I can't do this?
Yes.
It's more likely, but not very likely, because he wouldn't have risen to where he was in the Nazi hierarchy if he's the kind of person who would have qualms about killing Jews. Let's go back. He's young. He knows he's going to be drafted into the German army, and he could choose which service he's going to be in. He could go into the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, or any other service, but he decides on SS. Now he's only 18. So if he were to, when he joined SS, if somebody would say, there's going to be the day that you're going to throw 3-month-old kids in an oven, would he believe them?
No.
Maybe not. At that point, it could be he had real choice. Now, we don't know, because we don't know, the person I'm talking about is Eichmann, who was the commandant of Auschwitz and Mengele, but we don't know why they joined SS. They didn't write autobiographies. So it could be because they had already bought into the Nazi way of thinking. And it could be they just think 18-year-old boy. It could be he just wanted this really cool tattoo that says SS under his arm. Who knows? Let's go back earlier. Let's say maybe he already bought into Nazism. It could be you have to go back until when he was 11, and he could have gone into Eagle Scouts or Hitler Youth. Then for sure he had free choice. Okay, you can see this? So realize all of your big choices are made by the choices you make on a daily basis. So when you look at people who do big things in the world, okay, it's a consequence of their having made small choices or let things affect them on a deep level. Did any of you read Mandela's autobiography? It is Mandela, Nelson Mandela. You know who I'm talking about? Yeah, okay. So his autobiography is very moving, and what you see is that his choices to be who he was came through integrating things he saw in his life when he was young. When you, a Jewish autobiography that I keep on trying to get you guys to read is Rav Lau's autobiography, which they have in the Neve Library, which is even well written. So he was the youngest survivor. You may have seen a picture, if you've seen Holocaust pictures. There's a famous picture, it's an iconic picture, of survivors on a boat. One of them is showing numbers on his arm like this. And there's a child. The child is wearing a man's jacket that goes down like way past his knees. And he's holding a little Israeli flag, like a smiling little boy with blonde hair. So that's Rav Lau when he was a child. He was 8 years old in that picture. He looks younger because he was undernourished. He was 8. When he was 4, okay, the war began. Okay, his earliest conscious memory is they were separating people in his town at the train platform. It didn't wait until they got to the camps. They separated them then. His mother caught on. His father had already been killed. His mother caught on that all of the able-bodied, strong-looking people were put in one group, and all of the old people, women with babies, seemed to be in another group. So she realized it's not good to be in that group. So she handed him over, he was 4 years old, to his older brother, who was a teenager. And he told the brother, hold on to him, take care of him. So his first memory is that he didn't want to go with his brother, he wanted to be with his mom. So he was biting and kicking his brother, pulling his hair, and his brother had to hold him like that on the train, and at the same time hide him from the eyes of the Nazis. So somehow his brother was able to hide him all along, also through agreeing to doing other people's work to keep them quiet, things like this. He survived. So his earliest choice, and I found that fascinating that he remembered it. He saw people who were saying they saw so much death and suffering that life has no value and I'll just get by. He said, I remember who I am. He said that at 8. I remember who I am. My father was a rabbi. I'm going to be a rabbi. I'm going to be instead of him. They killed him. I'm going to replace him. You understand this? As it turns out, he's the 38th generation of rabbis in his family. And his son is currently the Ashkenazi chief rabbi. Okay, so the reason I'm telling you his story is that it was a small decision, which is not to give the Nazis victory, at 8, that had huge effects in his life. Okay, last thing that makes you yourself, as I told you there are 5, are habits. So I don't mean habits like brushing your teeth, which are also habits, but I mean habits of response. How many of you have ever taken a 2-year-old to the supermarket? Okay. Okay. Wasn't it wonderful? Okay. So all trips with 2-year-olds to the supermarket, they could have different beginnings, but they have similar ends. How does the trip with the baby to the supermarket end?
I want this.
Okay, crying. There's always some crying before you leave. Okay, you could see this? So suppose you're like a particularly naive young mother, like you read all of the baby books, many of which are written by people who never had children. Okay, this is like 2. 2 is when language develops in a more sophisticated way. This is a good age to expose children to color and textures and give them names. So you read this in a book, say, oh, I'll take him to the supermarket. There are so many objects, colors, textures, perfect learning environment. So you put him in that little seat that they have in the shopping carts. And the first thing that went wrong is it was like this pyramid of canned juice, and he pulled out the one that holds up the whole pyramid. Okay, and it went downhill from there. So you're online, you're at the checkout, and he's crying because, you know how at checkout they have only things the 2-year-olds shouldn't have? Like razor blades, sleazy magazines, things like that. So he wants everything, he's crying. And the woman in back of you in the checkout is perfect. You know what I mean? She's like around 35. She looks like she's a presidential candidate. She's dressed for success. You could see her, and now you already have spit up on you, and there were spilled things in your card, and the baby is crying. And how many of you could picture giving the baby a piece of chocolate, which he doesn't need, just to shut him up because you want to get out of the store at this point? You could picture doing this? You could do it. You three could do it. How many of you couldn't do it? Good for you. What? Yeah, it's bad, but like I could see doing it anyway. Even though I know it's bad, I could see I just went out. Okay. So if you do this often enough, you teach your child a valuable life lesson. What valuable life lesson could you begin learning it to?
You can't.
If they like act negatively, then
Yeah. Scream equals get. Are the people who do this at 50? Okay. I once saw like this fist fight. It was so bizarre. Somebody took a taxi to Rehov Kablan here, and the driver was trying to rip him off by 5 shekels. Like it said 25 shekels on the meter, and he wanted 30. Now, think 5 shekels. What is that in American money? $1.25. Is that going to change anybody's life a lot?
But
No.
it's a concept of morality. Why are you trying to cheat me?
Yeah, no, the driver's wrong. It's not like, but if you were to ask this man who hit the driver, I'll give you $100 to hit someone. Would he have taken $100 and hit someone?
Here? Yes.
Here?
Yeah.
Not on Rehov Kablan. Everybody's here is religious. No, here. No, but for $1.25 he did, because he's used to the idea of self-defense. This is a habit. You can't rip me off. I'm not going to let you. Okay, clear? Without thinking about, is it worth it? Is it worth it for me to hit someone for this? Is it worth it for me to end up with a black eye because this guy is going to hit me back? And then like go to my office with a black eye and start to explain things to my clients the rest of the day. Oh, I just had a little mishap. It's fine. But I got $1.25. I mean, you know. So most of us are victims of our own habits to some degree. You could see this? There are people who do it the opposite. There are people who get habituated to being agreeable. Do you understand what I mean? No matter what it is, they'll say yes. They'll agree with what you're saying. Are you alive or dead? I think you're dead. Oh yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Whatever. Because when they were young, they were able to get a better response from people by being agreeable. Okay, clear? So now if you want to know yourself, let's review the 5. Heredity, environment, potentials, choices, habit. So your assignment for tomorrow is to try to get to know yourself. Now when you do this, if you really do this, which is worth your while, you're going to notice that you have some imperfections. No. Okay. Okay, except for her. Okay. So the first thing that you have to know when you're going to adapt yourself to living a Torah life is having imperfections is the name of the game. There's nobody who's perfect. Life is about process. It's not about perfection. The function of Torah is to make you able to live your process in which you're continually growing and changing and improving. It's not to make you perfect. Nobody is going to be perfect. Okay, so now we could begin talking about Torah. So today I'm going to begin by describing you the construction of Torah. Tomorrow we're going to talk about you and Torah, how you with your character fit into what the Torah is and how we know the Torah is true. Here's the construction of Torah. Okay, so there were great spiritual heroes in our background in the age of roots who started new movements. One of them was Avraham. So he brought 2 things into the world. One is recognizing that the force that brought everything about could only be one because numbers are physical. So he was the first true monotheist. The other thing is he realized that I'm part of God's plan, which means I have to be a good person, I have to be kind. So he initiated this way of approaching life. His son Yitzchak added something to that recipe. I have to overcome myself if I'm going to be perfected. I can't just say I'm good because I'm good. I have battles to fight. I have wars to win inside. Yaakov said everyone could be pure, everyone could be godlike. He brought in belief in the human soul into the world. Shortly after that, in a relatively short amount of time, over the next several hundred years, Yaakov's descendants were numerous enough to be called a people. They ended up in Egypt because of a famine, were released by miracle. Okay, and now we have this people who are not yet called the Jews. Okay, this people are being treated differently than other people by God. More miracles, more involvement, because they were choosing to seek God and to imitate Him. So the first part of revelation of Torah took place at Mount Sinai, where they heard the Ten Commandments. After they received the Ten Commandments, Moshe went back up to heaven to bring down the rest of the Torah over 40 days. He came down, they built the golden calf, back up. They end up in the desert for 40 years. During that time, Moshe taught them the entire Torah. At the end of that time, he was told by God to write down some, but not all of it. The sum that he was told to write down is what we call the 5 books of Moses. Okay, clear? But most of it was not written down. So, again, proving to you that this all happened is for tomorrow. Today is just structure. Why do you think all of it wasn't written down? Why not write down everything? Sometimes, why do you think some of it is oral? That's exactly what I'm...
For freedom of, like, choice.
It gives you better choices, but it also forces people to learn from a living teacher, so you could ask questions and get answers, which you can't with the text. Some of it is written because the written word has great power, so they're both things. Okay, so the oral Torah was retained with a whole set of checks and balances until a little over 2,000 years ago. Then, due to the Roman oppressions, it had to be written down. So the first part of the oral law to be written down is called Mishnah. The second part is called Gemara. Together they're called Talmud. Okay, so when you're talking about Torah, you mean the 5 books plus the Talmud plus one other component. In the written law itself, it says, there will be prophets. We don't know how many prophets there were, but we know how many prophets were written down. So there are 48 books of prophecy, some of which are joined together in one volume. So if you were to know the whole Torah, like, wow, it would be knowing all 5 books, all of the prophets, and all of the Talmud. The next thing to be written down, though, was all of the mystic tradition, which they were very reluctant to write down because it's easily corrupted. Okay, so that's what Torah is. But what makes Torah Torah is, remember we said at the beginning, there's intelligence in the one who brought everything about? It's God's version of how to make it work. What Torah is the GPS written by God. So you could divide Torah into 2 basic segments, the stories and the laws. The stories are to give you principles of morality and to show you cause and effect morally. The laws have a different effect. The laws could be divided into 2 groupings, positive and negative. Give me a positive law. The Torah says, do what? Respect your parents. Okay? So the purpose of any positive law is to bring out what's holy and good in you. What's brought out if you treat your parents decently and respectfully? What positive things are brought out in you, besides it benefiting them? Morality, your gratitude, your kindness. You could see this? When you don't, it isn't just that the parents have a worse life, but you become a worse person. They made a law in Florida recently. There were so many people who were putting their elderly parents in the emergency room, parents who had suffered strokes and couldn't communicate, wearing clothes that had no way of identifying, meaning they took out all the labels. They would just put the parent in there in a wheelchair. The parent can't speak and walk away, leaving the parent to be cared for by the hospital permanently. So they just made a law against doing this because it happens so frequently that they needed a law. So forget about the parent who may be aware, just not able to speak. Forget about what a horrific thing that is to them. What does that do to the child who does something? Picture a 45-year-old child who did something like that. What kind of a person are they? Selfish, self-absorbed, unwilling to look at their own future, ingrateful. So this isn't the kind of person you want to be. You also have negative laws. The Torah says not to do certain things. Give me an example of a negative law. Or somebody else. Don't.
Don't steal.
Huh? Yeah, you.
Go ahead and say anything.
You didn't say anything.
It's like don't kill, don't steal.
Don't kill, don't steal. So let's say you were really angry at your roommate here in Neve. What could she do that would make a certain kind of person angry? She sat on your bed. She sat on your bed. So in this room, were any of you going to take out your handy Uzi machine gun and kill her? She will. Watch out. Don't sit on her bed. Okay, clear? She keeps it open. The magazine is always in, right? Okay. Okay, but a lot of us won't. Okay. Pretend you did something like that. What does that say about you? Forget about the victim. Just think about the perpetrator. How does that... Impulsive, doesn't see the value of human life, couldn't possibly understand what an eternal soul is. Okay, clear? So that's what Torah is about. Next time we're going to talk about how you know the truth of Torah and what the mitzvahs are and how they work. Okay? So today I'm just going to tie it all together. What did we learn? What we learned is about ourselves and about what being a good person is. So if you review this, remember those are the two things to focus upon.